Hi, my name's Phil. I like to talk about politics, and this is just what is now a weekly little thing where I pick out a few comments that have appeared on the channel that might be worth just saying a little bit more on without actually doing a full video. It doesn't really need that, just a few minutes each one. So we'll get started. First of all, apparently this post box irritates people, even though anyway, whatever. So we'll just get rid of that. There we go. I'll have to try and rethink that one. So let's just get straight into the largest one first of all. So this was talking about, when I was talking about referenda, how Switzerland seem to have their heads screwed on when they deal with referenda and how we don't at all. But someone seemed to be sort of taking exception to a few things. So I'll just go over some things here. It says, here are some facts. David Cameron wasn't lying when he said his government would implement the vote. Now, there's a couple of things I would say about that comment. First of all, I didn't say that what David Cameron was lying about was about the government implementing the vote or not. What David Cameron said was that the referendum was legally binding. He specifically said that. That is a lie, because that's not the case. But the other thing is, I would actually say that David Cameron was still lying in saying that his government would implement the vote, because his government had no chance of implementing the vote, because what is the first thing that David Cameron did once the result came out? He quit. His government disbanded. He disappeared off to France, as he was always going to do. I mean, he wasn't even going to see out the parliament anyway, even if he won the referendum. But when he lost it, he immediately resigned. And that's not just a reaction. He would have planned to have done that if the result went that way as well. So he was still lying even on that basis, I would say there. So I've got to disagree with you still there. Next one, it says, Labour and Conservative manifestos both said they would work to leave. Not quite, not quite. Labour certainly was saying that they would seek to, they wanted to have access to the single market. They also wanted to have close alignment with EU standards, basically keeping all those EU standards. Basically, if you looked down what Labour said they wanted, what they wanted was full membership benefits without a seat on the council or seats in the European Parliament. Now, that could be done. I mean, the rest of the EU could look at that and say, oh, so you want to be part of the club, but you don't get to cause trouble in the EU Council or the Parliament? Yeah, that works for us. You'll pay extra, of course, because that's what Norway do. Norway pay more than we do when you consider the size of the economies in the nations for access to that. That would have been fine. So that's what Labour promised to do. Now, it depends what you call leaving the EU, because the narrative now, when you talk to Brexiteers who are still gung-ho about this, they would argue that's not leaving the EU, because we would still be bound by the European Court of Justice on any matters pertaining to those shared values, to anything to do with trade between the two. We'd basically have to do what the EU say, just like Norway do, without any say ourselves. That's what that was. So that all depends on what you mean. The other thing to note, of course, is that Labour lost. And as soon as a party loses a general election, put it this way, when a party wins a general election and forms a government, they say that the people have given them a mandate for their manifesto. Now, you can't have it both ways. If you're going to say that the party that forms a government has had their manifesto endorsed by the people, by definition, the manifesto for the party that lost has had it rejected by the general population as well. So that makes no difference either way as well. Then it says, Phil has no idea what all Leavers voted for, apart from Leave. No, indeed. That is the whole point. That is the point. It's Brexiteers that try and say every single one of those 17.4 million, who are not even all around anymore, voted to Leave for this version of Leave, which is a version of Leave that was never campaigned for. That is the whole point. Absolutely. My point all the way through is that not everyone voted for the same thing. So I'm not quite sure where that has come from, I have to say. Because the whole point is this: how many of those 17.4 million people, well, none of them voted for no deal because that wasn't an option, and also no one campaigned for it. So 0 people vote for that. I know that. That's a fact. However, many of those voters may well have thought, well, if that was an option, I'd have still picked that. Fine. Okay. But it wasn't 17.4 million or anywhere close to it, which means that the number of people who voted to leave and would have happily voted to leave with no deal if necessary was way below 50% of those who voted to leave. In other words, more than 50% would have voted to stay if the version of leaving was no deal. So we know that. Then it says the fine for financial irregularities was from the Electoral Commission, not the law courts. The Electoral Commission have the power of a law court in this respect. They have the power to impose fine. They have the power to determine someone's guilt or innocence. So it's the same thing, right? There are certain offences that they don't have the power, and they pass those on to the police, as they have done. And of course, the police have been stymied by the fact that the government have blocked them from properly investigating the extra criminal acts. But the Electoral Commission has the power, the legal power, to determine whether groups or people have broken certain laws and to impose fines as a result of that. So that's irrelevant. It says, Leave has not, to my knowledge, ever been found guilty of any criminal act. Yes, they have. No, they have. It is a criminal act. And the Electoral Commission, you need to look into this. The Electoral Commission have the power to say that. There are just certain criminal acts that is outside their remit. They pass those on to the police. Leave.eu and Vote Leave broke criminal law. That has been determined, and the Electoral Commission has the power to determine that. So that is a fact. You need to read into that. You can go into the Electoral Commission's own site and find out for yourself on that one. And the next couple of these weren't really the ones to put it in, though, but might as well finish it off, just to be polite. It says Brexit is all about whether the politicians have the nerve to overrule an instruction from the people of the UK to leave, and the political calculation as to whether it will benefit them politically. I totally agree that is the calculation many MPs are making, but it's not true, because it's not an instruction from the people, because apart from anything else, that instruction was based on false information. So therefore the instruction is also false. But the other thing is, even if you take it as read, that let's say you don't think that the information was false at the time, which is baffling. In the here and now, 70% of elderly people voted to leave. Quite a lot of those people, and I mean a lot of those people, have now died. 70% of young people voted to remain, and quite a lot of those people, that couldn't vote then, as keeps being pointed out, people born in this millennium were not allowed to vote then. But quite a lot of them are now legally entitled to vote were there to be another one. And then, of course, there's been people who've seen the carnage wreaked by just trying to leave the EU and have changed their minds. So, no politician really believes, no MP believes that it's actually an instruction from the people, even the Brexiteers, because otherwise there's an easy way to achieve leaving the EU. Easy way, without having to take on Parliament. You can have Parliament's permission. All you have to do is say, right, this is the withdrawal agreement. We put it to the people. Do you want this? Is this what you want? Or do you want to stay? Or if needs be, put no deal in as well, but that's dodgy. But whatever, you would just go there and the Brexiteers would be totally confident that they would win by an even more handsome margin. But they know they wouldn't. They know they wouldn't. It says what the Brexit referendum really was, a political device to get the Tories off the hook, and it backfired. Yes, that is absolutely true. Now we all have to reap the reward. I don't think there's a reward in this. The only way you can see the Tories get out of it will be through another referendum with either a straight down the line leave with a deal, no deal, or single transferable system vote with the options leave, deal, remain. Either way, in the end, I suspect leave will probably win. No, they wouldn't in that situation. That's not the only way for the Tories to get out of it. In fact, a public vote is... The reason they're opposing it is because that sinks them. There is, unfortunately, I'm going to have to tackle this in another video later this week in a bit more detail. There is a way the Tories can get out of it. Because there isn't, at the moment, effective opposition, they could actually win a general election. There is likely to be a general election. The Conservatives could win it. There is a way out for them. It's a risk. And I'm not saying it's likely they would win, but it's possible. And that is the only way out for them. I agree that they can't just plough on with no deal as such. That's not a way out for them. They can't obviously cancel it. They can't go for a public vote, or at least not push it themselves. Parliament can force their hand on that. But it is tricky, but it is possible that they could win a general election. Even if that meant some god-awful coalition, as some people think would happen with the Brexit Party, but I don't think that is terribly realistic. but it is possible. But anyway, that was the longest one. Let's go on to the next one. So, says here, again, there's a little bit of a misconception here. It says, if Boris Johnson wishes to take Britain out of the EU, according to the latest information from the Attorney General, he said here, the government's top legal man, Boris Johnson can do this and Parliament cannot stop him, even if there were to be a vote of no confidence and or general election call. That's not true. Now, here's the thing. You're assuming here the Attorney General is a legal expert on this matter. He is not. The Attorney General is a politician, an MP. There are always, in the largest parties, a number of MPs who are also former solicitors. And usually some of them are QCs as well, which means Queen's Counsel. That's fairly senior. The current Attorney General is Geoffrey Cox. Geoffrey Cox was the Attorney General under Theresa May, and Boris Johnson, at the moment at any rate, has retained him as Attorney General. Geoffrey Cox is not an expert in either EU or British law. Now, you can look at it and say, well, he's a qualified solicitor and he's a QC as well. He's more qualified than you are, Phil. Absolutely he is, but he is not an expert in British and EU law. And when I pronounce on these things, I don't do it based on me just reading through things myself. I do it based on reading what actual experts in British and EU law have said. Geoffrey Cox, when he was doing his work, was dealing with commercial law, contracts between companies. So, all the Attorney General is, it has to be a qualified solicitor so that they can actually understand legal documents. But to be honest, most legal documents are not that complex. Where you need experts in law is because you can easily read a piece of legislation and go, oh, right, yeah, that means that. But an expert in law will be familiar with it and other ones as well. And sometimes when you combine one piece of legislation with another, or it might be two sections within the same piece of legislation, all of a sudden the meaning of it changes a little bit, with the context of the other piece of legislation. That's why you need experts in these pieces of law. That's why legal arguments have to be made. That's why court cases can become complex. Otherwise, any court case in the world would just be someone going to a judge and saying, well, this is what we think. When you can have two sides that don't disagree with the basic facts of the case, and the judges still have to preside over what's right. And that's because you've got to go through lots of pieces of legislation, fit them together. That's why you need experts. Geoffrey Cox isn't an expert. I'll accept that he's an expert in commercial law, because that's what he is, but not in British constitutional or EU law. He's no better than any other solicitor. So that is a total misconception. You cannot assign a level of expertise to him just because he's been made the Attorney General. And the other thing to bear in mind is, being made Attorney General, you're not made Attorney General because you have the highest level of legal expertise in your party. It's a political appointment like every other ministerial appointment, right? He has been chosen because Boris Johnson thinks, out of all the choices he has available in his party, this is the man most likely to back up what he wants him to back up with. But as he showed with Theresa May, he won't perjure himself in the Commons to do so. Next one. It says, Bojo is a closet Remainer who only backed Brexit to win over the Brexiteers, who would still support him as their valiant champion who fought for them. His biggest problem is the Leave campaign winning. I don't know. Certainly that's what I have thought for a number of years, because it makes sense. For all the way before this Brexit referendum ever became a thing, Boris Johnson, whenever he was speaking as a politician, was always saying how mad it would be to leave the EU, how we needed the EU. All very mercantile. He certainly wasn't building up the political aims of the EU, but in terms of the economic benefits, absolutely always building it up. And it was also known that before he came out as a Brexiteer, he wrote two articles for, what was it? It's the Daily Telegraph he writes for, isn't it? He wrote two articles, one passionately saying how important it was to remain in the EU, and one passionately saying how important it was to leave the EU. And in the end, and it was a close run thing, and in the end he decided to go for the Brexit option. And yes, absolutely, it was a political calculation, so that the idea was that Remain would win, but not by a huge margin. It was always going to be a close margin either way. and that then David Cameron had already said that he was going to be quitting later that Parliament anyway, because David Cameron didn't really want to be Prime Minister, and Boris Johnson had his eyes on the prize, and he thought, right, if I lead the Brexiteer charge, then I can have all those MPs around me, and there you go, guaranteed to get himself on the ballot paper. And if he just uses his charm to win over the larger party membership, then he can become Prime Minister. That was certainly the idea behind it. Absolutely. That being said, when he was a journalist many years ago, for the Spectator to begin with, I think, he was always attacking the EU. As a journalist, he was always attacking the EU, making up the most outrageous things as well. He just made up things. He would read through and find little things and say, oh, the EU are banning us from having this, or, you know, he's the sort of person that was coming up with the banning the bendy bananas. In fact, I think the banning prawn cocktail crisps was one of his, which of course is ridiculous. In fact, at the time, in the 90s, when he was writing this stuff, they were my favourite crisps. It's cheese and onion now. But we still have prawn cocktail crisps. They've never been banned. But he said that they were, you know, it's the most outrageous things he would come out with. And he apparently as well, he used to scream and shout at a yucca plant to work himself up so that he could be really aggressive in his writing. So then you think, so was he really? So, I mean, was he just attacking the EU as a journalist because it's an easy thing to do to sell papers and advance his career? And was he really of the view, like he was as a politician, that leaving the EU would be mad? Or was he attacking the EU because he really was massively Eurosceptic? And was he saying all the things he said as a politician because he didn't see being a hardened Eurosceptic as being all that beneficial to a political career? And if you think about it, it's not, or it hasn't been in the past, because Tory leaders have not been anti-Europe. Certainly the ones who've, you know, become prime ministers have you know, ever since we joined, have been pro-European. So maybe he saw it as not really a path to becoming prime minister to be anti-European until the referendum maybe made him think otherwise. So I actually don't know, I have to say. I was totally convinced as you are. Your view was exactly the same as mine. Now I'm less sure. I'm not quite sure. Don't know. Is the way I'm going to have to leave that. Next one says, this is all caused because we don't have a constitution. I'll stop there for a moment. We do have a constitution. It's just not written down in one place. You know, it's in lots of different vella, you know, in somewhere in Westminster. But anyway, it says all the energy pumped into the Brexit nonsense should have been spent on codifying one, and now we're all going to get kicked out naked from the EU, still without a constitution. Of course, the EU and the bureaucrats are to blame. The very same ones who made the kipper more expensive and environmentally damaging. Yeah. No, we do. And also, if let's say we had a written, one document that had our constitution, which no other country has, by the way, then I don't understand how that helps. Like and in fact, I think it hinders countries. Take America as a classic example. You know, people will stop when a law needs changing in America. Opponents of it will just point to the Constitution and say, well, no, we can't change it. You have the maddest things. You have people defending an amendment to the US Constitution as being untouchable. And you're just thinking, it's an amendment. It was already touched. It was already changed. You are saying that this change to a constitution is set in stone because it's the Constitution. The thing that was already changed. Makes no sense. But that's what people do. Whereas when you have a much more fluid constitution like we do, you don't have that argument. You can have all sorts of other stupid arguments, but you cannot have that argument. That does not work in this country. So I think it's better. And I don't understand what would have changed with Brexit. What at all? You know, what we needed was ideally we needed a media that holds politicians to account. We don't have that. A constitution would not have presented that. The constitution wouldn't help in that situation. The only other thing is we ideally would have had, as I say, like Switzerland, a system where if a referendum was if people were given the wrong information, false information in it, that you rerun it and that's it. That's the legal situation. We don't have that. But again, that's got nothing to do with a constitution. That's just to do with British law regarding referenda. That's all. You know, it should be the case. Two things. First of all, it should be the case that the correct information is given to the public, and if it's not, you rerun it. Second of all, it should be made clear what people are voting for. Nobody said what leave actually meant. You know, all this leave means leave, Brexit means Brexit. Really, what does that mean then? What exactly does that mean? Write me out a short essay. No one actually said. No one's still saying. 3 years later, no one's saying. So, I mean, even the people, people are going, well, it means we leave all the EU systems. Even the no-deal Brexiteers aren't saying that. That's just the people who aren't paying any attention at all. The no-deal Brexiteers like Boris Johnson think that as soon as we leave with no deal, that the EU will be knocking on our door, begging us to have a deal. Oh, yeah, of course, yeah, we'll just kick out the backstop. It wasn't actually that important. That's what they think. They don't actually anticipate forging ahead into the future without arrangements with our closest neighbours. Not even the no-deal Brexiteers are envisaging that. What they are envisaging is, of course, unicorns farting rainbows running around a meadow. But, you know, that's not happening. So, yeah, that's my take on that one anyway. Right, where's the next one? Okay, yes, tricky. So it says, where is the Labour Party when you need them? Yes, I'm afraid, yes. It says, I cannot believe any previous Labour leader, Wilson, Kinnock, Smith, Blair, etc., would have allowed Johnson to get away with making empty, uncosted promises like these. No, they would not. No, even Ed Miliband would not have done that. And I think Ed Miliband's major problem was he wasn't a good campaigner. But he would not have let him get away with this. Public services, especially railways, are supposed to be Corbyn's forte. Quite, indeed. One reason the Tories will be routed in Scotland is because the SNP is so efficient at demolishing Tory unicorns. No, I'm not going to agree there. I don't agree with that at all. One reason the Tories will be routed in Scotland is because the Tories are always routed in Scotland. The reason for this is simply this. The Conservatives play to the... They get into government by just capturing Middle England. It's where the seat, it's where the population of the country is. It's where the seats are. And that is why you get this massive disconnect with other parts of the UK, because they're only trying to appeal there. They play lip service to everywhere else. The only reason why this divide seems to be Scotland, England, and Wales and Northern Ireland as well, because they're not exactly trying to woo them either. But really, if we think in terms of that Scotland-England bloc, and not Scotland and north of England and the south of England, is simply because, you know, the Tories don't, when they're talking about, when they're trying to stir up the feelings of people in the southeast, they don't talk about the south of England, they talk about England. And there's people in the north, not many thankfully, but there are people in the north who are dumb enough to think he's talking about them. He's not. What have they ever done for the north of England? So really that divide should be the southeast and the rest of the country. They don't care about the rest of the country. They know they're going to nick the odd seat here and there. They don't nick seats in Scotland. The odd one. The odd one. Very rare. And some, you know, there's been elections where they've got none in Scotland. Nothing to do with the SNP. They were getting next to no seats in Scotland before the SNP became a major force. You know. In fact, really, you could argue the reason why the SNP became the major force it is now is purely because, as you say there isn't an effective opposition for them to get behind. And that, obviously in 2010, they weren't going to back the Conservatives, but obviously a lot of people were very unhappy with Gordon Brown with the Labour government. So SNP, natural choice. In 2015, Labour were not, even under Ed Miliband is infinitely better than Jeremy Corbyn in terms of campaigning, but he was still poor. So it was difficult to get behind him. That's really the reason. If we had an effective Labour Party, then that would be a different matter. It says the fact that Ruth Davidson hates Johnson is another factor, of course. I wouldn't put too much on that either. Everyone hates Johnson. People in his own party that are supporting him hate him. He's almost universally hated. No one likes him. Maybe some people in the DUP genuinely like him. I don't know. That's difficult to say. But people in his own party, he is hated in his own party. Truly hated. At the moment, Boris Johnson cannot fill up, or, we're days later now, we're nearly a week since he was proclaimed leader, and he still hasn't finished his government positions. He still hasn't filled them up. And he can't. That's why. Because there are some people who are interested enough in their own political careers that they toe the line. But there are plenty who are not. They hate him so much they will not serve in his government. He's hated everywhere. But anyway, let's get on to the last one really quickly. It says, what are the... No, God, it's the trickiest one, this. I've forgotten about this. Right. What are the exact circumstances Parliament can prevent the UK leaving without a deal, and how? Would a backbencher have to re-propose one of May's withdrawal agreements? Maybe the one with only Northern Ireland remaining in the customs union. They could try that. No, that's... the thing is, we are in completely new territory here. Completely new. Nothing... If we're looking at a scenario, which we are, whereby Parliament will say, Prime Minister, you need to go and get us another extension. And the Prime Minister either says no, or, OK, I'll go as your representative, goes there and then spends the whole council meeting throwing sweets at President Macron and Chancellor Merkel, then yes, that's trouble. What can Parliament do about that? There's a few MPs that have said, well, should we just send the Queen? That's dodgy. She can't really do that. There are two things. There might be something else that I just don't know, because it needs constitutional experts, and I'm not one. And I haven't seen them say what they can realistically do. In truth, it might take till September before these things start to be being discussed. It annoys me in a certain sense that real journalists, because I'm just a commentator, but real journalists aren't going and finding this information out and reporting on it. But maybe that's because they're just waiting to see what Parliament does. There are two things that come to mind, though. First of all, what Parliament can do is to revoke Article 50. So let's say Johnson comes back, says, they wouldn't give me an extension. I don't know what to say. I was throwing sweets at them. Everyone likes sweets. I was throwing sweets at them for an hour and they didn't give me an extension. What can you do? And Parliament can stand up and say, I'll tell you what we can do. We can revoke Article 50. Now, that would be politically very dodgy. But they could do that. That would put the kibosh on it. The other thing is, and again, I have already done a video on this in the past, but I'm going to redo it with some extra information, and maybe it was a little bit garbled, I think, last time as well. There is, when we're talking about experts in EU and British constitutional law, there is an argument from such people that everyone is assuming at the moment that 31st of October comes and goes, we don't have an extension. So the 1st of November, we're out of the EU. Actually, those experts argue, and it's a compelling argument, that that's not the case at all. There is nothing in law that says that when the Article 50 extension lapses, that we are out of the EU. Nothing. Doesn't say it in Article 50, doesn't say it in any other part of the Lisbon Treaty. And that's the problem with people just looking at Article 50. There are other parts of the Lisbon Treaty that have something to say on it as well, which people aren't looking at, which they need, I'll do in my video. There's also British law as well that makes that not the default situation at all. So from the point of view of legal experts, and obviously these things always have to be tested in a court of law before you can be totally sure, because there is no precedent for this, is the situation could well be, and I might even argue is probably the case, that on the 1st of November, that extension lapses, and it's like, well, we're still in the EU, the thing just lapsed, that's all. And we're in sort of legal limbo, because perhaps the people drafting these laws didn't really consider this eventuality. So it could well be that Parliament doesn't actually have to do anything. It can just sit on its hands and go, yeah, you think, and on the 1st of November, say to Johnson, we're still in the EU, and he goes, no, we're not. He said, yeah, I think you'll find we are. Now, obviously, it would have to go to court very quickly to establish the full facts. But anyway, I'll leave it there. Thanks very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to click the like button and maybe subscribe as well. And until next time, I'll see you later.